Dear Broken Sound residents, I'm so sad to not be with all of you together this year, as it would have been my 13th year in a row with all of you. But as we know, there is nothing that hasn't been interrupted this year, and the important thing is that the community that I love serving is healthy and well. When Ed told me that the Seders were canceled this year, I immediately asked him if I could record this Seder for you to have in your homes. It may not be perfect, but I ask that you understand that it is from my heart, and I am thrilled to know that some of you may welcome me into your Seders in a healthy and meaningful way. We say every year, next year in Jerusalem, but this year I just want to say, next year, may we all be together, whatever that may be. I wish you all a Zisen Pesach and hope to see you again very soon. So welcome to our Seder. On this screen, you will see the live window of my recording, as well as on the screen, the page from the Haggadah as I move through the service. I've also asked Ed to email everybody a copy of the PDF, so if you chose, you may have decided to print this out yourselves, and if so, that's just fine. At any time, if you would like to pause my recording to have a conversation, you get to do that without me yelling at you to be quiet this year. So we've got to look for the silver lining in things. I'm so excited to bring you this Passover Seder. Please join me as we begin with our candle lighting. We say the blessings over the candles, not for Shabbat this year, but for Yom Tov, wishing ourselves and each other a happy and a healthy holiday. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlich ner shel Yom Tov. We also say at the bottom of this page the Shehachianu, saying thank you to God for allowing us to reach this joyous moment in time. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shehachianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu Lazman Hazeh. We continue with our sanctification on page 2. Since ancient times, every Jewish festive meal has begun with the Kiddush. It originally celebrated our exodus from Egypt. In many ways, it is a celebration of freedom, but it is also a reminder that even today, most people on earth are not free. So tonight we celebrate freedom for everyone on earth who is lucky enough to be free. And we pray for freedom for those who still live shackled by the chains of fear, the chains of poverty, the chains of slavery, and the chains of religious intolerance. Please join me on the bottom of this page. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. We continue on page 3 with the guests of honor on our Seder plate. Now, I'm sure each of you have some semblance of a Seder plate at home. Again, please feel free to pause my recording if you wish to talk about any of the meanings of these components that we incorporate into our Seder. Or maybe while I'm moving through the Seder, just have one person who holds up each item from your Seder plate. And here we continue. When Moses asked the Pharaoh to free the Jews, the Pharaoh refused. God brought a horrible plague down upon the Egyptians. So it was no big surprise when Pharaoh changed his mind and promised to free the Jews. The surprise was when he broke his promise. Predictably, God smote Egypt with yet another plague. Pharaoh promised again and again he broke his promise. This happened 10 times. So God, in his infinite wisdom and frustration, sent a particularly horrible plague on Egypt to make sure he had Pharaoh's complete attention. He sent the angel of death to kill the firstborn child of every Egyptian. So the Jews sacrificed lambs and smeared the blood on their doorposts as a sign for the angel of death to pass over the homes of the Jewish people. The roasted lamb bone is symbolic of the animals who gave their lives to protect the firstborn children of the Jewish people. Next on our Seder plate is the egg. Eggs are a symbol of fertility and eternity. If the Jews had escaped into the desert and stopped having children, it would have meant the end of the Jewish people. Next on our Seder plate, we have the maror, the bitter herbs. Bitter herbs symbolize the bitterness of life without freedom, without hope, and without promise. The life that our ancestors suffered under Pharaoh. We also have the salt water. Salt water represents the tears of pain and hardship that our ancestors shed in slavery, and the nightmare of knowing that their children would be born into slavery as well. The next item on the Seder plate is my personal favorite, haroset. The haroset symbolizes the mortar that our ancestors used to build the pyramids. The sweet taste reminds us that even in the most bitter depths of slavery, our ancestors never stopped yearning for the sweet taste of freedom. And we also have the karpas, the parsley. We finally come to the parsley, a garnish that to Jews is a symbol of springtime and renewal. We cannot live on the greens of the earth alone, nor can we live on the salt of the sea. So we dip the greens in salt water to remind us that everything on earth is part of a giant balancing act of animals, vegetables, and minerals, and they all must interact to sustain life. So now, please take your parsley and dip it into the salt water as we recite the blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri ha'adamah. And we say in English, blessed are you, creator of the universe, who creates the fruit of the earth. Next on our Seder plate is the matzah. We all know that before you bake bread, you have to wait for the dough to rise. That process traps air in the dough to make it thick and soft. When our ancestors escaped from slavery in Egypt, they were more concerned about surviving the murderous spears of Pharaoh's soldiers and the deadly heat of the desert than they were about the rising of the bread. Matzah is what happens to bread on those rare occasions when you can't take the time to wait for your dough to rise, especially when Pharaoh's soldiers are close behind. So we eat the matzah to remind us of the dangers that our ancestors faced and the sacrifices that they made in leaving behind the only world they knew, in leaving their homes and their belongings to race into a barren, parched, unknown desert wasteland in search of freedom. Matzah is the bread of poverty. Some people say that we hide a piece of matzah to remind us that when we were poor, we could not eat without setting aside some of our food for the next meal. But we also break the matzah to remind us that we must set some of our food aside today for those who go hungry, as the Jews did under Pharaoh. Let all who are hungry come and eat. We hold the piece of matzah and we read together. Matzah is the bread of poverty and affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat it with us. Let all who are in need come and share our meal. This year we are here. Next year we may all be in Israel. This year we are still slaves. Next year may we all be free. And now it is time to take that piece of matzah in the middle and break it in half and hide the larger half for the afikomen. Now, hey kids, be sure to watch whoever broke that matzah and see when and where they hide it so that you can go and find the afikomen after your meal is over. Just in case you didn't know, the Seder is not over until the afikomen is found and ransomed to the highest bidder. So kids, make sure you get a good ransom for your matzah. In the middle of the page, we now wash our hands. What a novel idea during our Passover Seder this year. We say the blessing over washing the hands. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim. We wash our hands symbolically, and we read the blessing in English at the bottom of the page. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who made us holy with his commandments and commands us concerning the washing of the hands. Let's begin tonight's story by asking 4 questions. Most of us think that the 4 questions begin with, why is this night different from all other nights? But in fact, the Hebrew, ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylot, is more accurately translated as a statement. Something like, oi, is this night different from all other nights? And actually it is. We ask the 4 questions either by asking the one question with 4 answers, or we ask the 4 questions individually and with its own answer. So we'll follow along with the page as it's written. Now you might want to have grown-ups read the bold and children read the response, or you can divide your table in 2 however you want, or I can read the bold and you all can join me on the answer. On all other nights we eat leavened bread. Why on this night do we eat only unleavened bread? Once we were slaves in Egypt. As we've already discussed, when we escaped from slavery, we were in no mood to bake. On all other nights, we eat all kinds of vegetables. Why on this night do we eat only bitter herbs? Once we were slaves in Egypt. The bitter taste helps us to understand how our ancestors must have felt as slaves and how so many people today feel when they are enslaved. The first time we dip our greens is to taste the taste of bitterness. On all other nights, we don't dip our herbs even once. Why on this night do we dip our herbs twice? Once we were slaves in Egypt. The first time we dip was to taste the bitterness of slavery, to remind us of the pain that our ancestors endured before escaping to freedom. The second time is to remind ourselves of the balance of life on our planet. On all other nights, we eat sitting any way we please. Why on this night must we all recline? Once we were slaves in Egypt. Everything at this Seder represents some aspect of that story. In this case, we lean back to symbolize our release from bondage, as if we were being released from the chains that were strapping us to our chairs. And now let's go, kiddos. It's time to sing the 4 questions. Mikol halelot, Mikol halelot, shebechu halelot, anu ochlim chametz umatzah, chametz umatzah. Halayla hazeh, kulo matzah. Halayla hazeh, kulo matzah. Shebecho halelot, anu ochlim she'ar yirakot, she'ar yirakot. Halayla hazeh, maror, maror. Halayla hazeh, maror, maror. Shebecho halelot, inanu mapilin, afilu pa'am echad, afilu pa'am echad. Halayla hazeh, teteh te'amin. Halayla hazeh, teteh te'amin. Shebecho halelot, anu ochlim bin yoshvinu bein mesubin, bin yoshvinu bein mesubin. Halayla hazeh, kulanu mesubin. Halayla hazeh, kulanu mesubin. And now we continue with the story of Passover. The Jews were originally welcomed guests in Egypt. It all began with Joseph, who came to Egypt and happened to meet the Pharaoh. As Jews often do, Joseph offered the Pharaoh some unsolicited advice. Build storehouses and fill them with grain. For some unknown reason, the Pharaoh decided to take Joseph's advice, which was fortunate for Pharaoh, the Egyptians, and the Jewish people, as years of famine did strike and there was still food left to eat. Pharaoh was so grateful that he invited Joseph's brothers and their families to move to Egypt. Joseph's family took advantage of Pharaoh's offer, and eventually they became known as the Israelites. The Israelites stayed in Goshen for 400 years. The first 200 years they found favor in Egypt and grew into a mighty nation. New Pharaoh was not happy, and he decreed that the Israelites be slaves. For another 200 years, the Israelites toiled as slaves. They yearned for a savior and they yearned for freedom. Ramses II became Pharaoh, and he watched the Hebrews grow in spite of their enslavement. He ordered that all newborn male Israelites be thrown and drowned in the Nile. One day, on the 7th of Adar, a baby son was born to two Hebrew slaves, Yocheved and Amram, from the house of Levi. From the moment he was born, we are told their son's face shone like the sun. Amram and Yocheved managed to hide their son in their hut for 3 months. However, as the infant's cry became louder, they knew that if they didn't do something, that he would be found and drowned. So they made a basket of reeds and pushed it out into the river. To this day, no one quite knows what they were thinking, but it somehow worked out okay. The Pharaoh's daughter was bathing in the river when the baby happened to float by. She heard the cry of the infant, and her heart was opened with compassion. She decided to keep him for her own. She named him Drawn from the Water. In Hebrew, we say Moshe. In Arabic, it is Musa. And in English, we pronounce it as Moses. Miriam, The older sister of the infant Moses watched from the reeds as Pharaoh's daughter held him to her breast. She approached the princess and told her of an Israelite woman who could wet nurse the infant. The woman was none other than Moses' mother, Yocheved. So for the next few years, although Moses was raised in Pharaoh's palace as a prince, his real mother, Yocheved, still cared for him. Moses grew up in the palace and learned all the things a prince would learn. He lived amongst royalty and luxury, yet only Yocheved, Miriam, and Aaron, his older brother, knew the truth, that Moses was really an Israelite slave. For 40 years, Moses lived as a prince of Egypt until one day Moses saw an Egyptian beating an Israelite slave, and Moses killed the Egyptian. Moses immediately fled the land of Egypt, and he became a shepherd in the land of Midian. In Midian, Moses worked as a shepherd for Jethro, and he married Jethro's daughter, Zipporah. They had children, and all was peaceful for another 40 years. Upon turning 80 years old, when Moses was tending his sheep on Mount Horeb, he noticed a flaming bush that burned, but was not being consumed. A voice called out to Moses, "Moses, Moses, I am the God of your ancestors. Take off your shoes, for you are standing on holy ground." And there, in the presence of God, Moses received his celestial orders to return to Egypt at once. So Moses rounded up his brother Aaron, and together they went down to Egypt to tell the Pharaoh to, what's that? All together now? Let my people go. When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. The Lord told Moses what to do. Let my people go to lead the children of Israel through. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Thus saith the Lord, bold Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborn dead. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. When they had reached the other shore, let my people go. They sang a song of triumph for, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, tell him what? Let my people go. So we know we've mentioned some of the plagues already, but we know that this was one very stubborn Pharaoh. So we need to talk about all of the plagues that Moses and the Lord brought upon Egypt. Now, as we do this, we take our glass of wine, and it is our tradition that we take a bit of wine on our small finger and we dab it onto our plate. Now, we do this because just taking out very little, we're taught a very important lesson. And that lesson is that even in the defeat of our enemies, we must never take joy and celebration in the demise of our enemies. So taking our wine out little by little represents our resistance to pain on anyone's behalf. So we recite the blessings first in English and then in Hebrew. Blood, dam. Frogs, tzvardeya. Lice, kinim. Beasts, arov. Cattle disease, dever. Boils, shechin. Hail, barad. Locusts, arba. Darkness, choshech. And the killing of the firstborn Egyptian, machat bechorot, before Pharaoh finally let the Jewish people go. The last plague was the worst, the slaying of the firstborn. Moses told the Israelites to slaughter a lamb and to dip hyssop into the blood and mark their doorposts, so the angel of death would pass over their homes. The angel of death smote all of the firstborn sons of the Egyptians, including Pharaoh's son. And finally, Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron to the palace, and he said, "Be gone, all of you." Quickly, by the light of the moon on the 15th of Nisan, the Israelites took their belongings and together with their Redeemer left Egypt. However, Ramses II had second thoughts. He sent his army after the Israelites. Pharaoh's army caught up with the Israelites at the Red Sea. Trapped between an army of Pharaoh's soldiers and death by drowning, Moses appealed to God, who obliged. Moses lifted his staff into the sky, and the walls of the Red Sea parted, allowing the Israelites to pass through. When the Egyptians tried to follow, the walls of water caved in and drowned them. Now, even though it's not in my actual Haggadah, every year at Broken Sound, I tell the story of my favorite character in the story of Passover. And guess what? It's not actually Moses, although he was pretty awesome. My favorite character in the story of Passover is one we rarely speak about, and his name was Nachshon. Now, Nachshon was the first person to reach the water. But something you don't know about Nachshon is he was terrified of the water. He did not know how to swim. So looking in front of him, he saw water and he knew that he was in grave danger having to go into the water. But as he looked behind him, he also saw Pharaoh's army coming close behind. And he knew he had to gather all of his courage in that moment. It was right then that Nachshon took his first step into the water. And he continued step by step, facing his fear and going in anyway. The Israelites followed him. And it was truly at that moment that the water parted, when Nachshon filled with courage and determination, and the people joined in courageously when they all took that first step together. They all made it across the river. Now, if God had taken us out of Egypt, that would have been enough. If he had punished the Egyptians and destroyed their idols, that would have been enough. If he had divided the sea and led us across dry land, that would have been enough. If he had taken care of us in the desert for 40 years and fed us, that would have been enough. If he had given us the Sabbath, that would have been enough. if he had brought us to Mount Sinai and given us the Torah, that would have been enough. If he had brought us to the land of Israel and built the holy temple, that most certainly would have been enough. For all of these things alone and together, we say, that would have been enough. And for all of these things, we are grateful. Now, I know you all know the song, so let's all join in. Ilu Hotzianu, Hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, Hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Ilu Natan, Natan Lanu, Natan Lanu, et HaTorah, Natan Lanu, et HaTorah, Dayenu. Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Ilu Natan, Natan Lanu, Natan Lanu, et HaShabbat, Natan Lanu, et HaShabbat, Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Good job. Having finally made it to freedom, the Israelites exclaimed, Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. We praise you, our God, who has freed the people of Israel. But our sages say it is not enough to take the Jews out of Egypt. We must take Egypt out of the Jews. This means that every new generation must remember the painful lessons of enslavement and fight for the freedom of all people. Please join me as we drink our next cup of wine. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. Now, at this moment, you should have an extra glass of wine on your table. This wine is for the prophet Elijah. So it is at this moment that we welcome Elijah. We pour that extra glass of wine and we set it on the table. We say, this cup is for Elijah the prophet. We open the door to greet him and we invite him to join our Seder and bring with him a time of peace and freedom. And we continue with Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimhera v'yameinu, Yavo Eleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Meladi. Have no fear, you're almost done with this portion of the Seder. We continue by highlighting the matzah and the maror. And so we take a piece of matzah again and we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. We read the English. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. There is a second blessing that we say over the matzah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat matzah. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us to eat unleavened bread. And now we continue on the bottom of the page. At this time, everyone should take a bit of maror and some haroset. And we dip the maror into the haroset to recall the bitterness of slavery that our ancestors were able to withstand only because it was sweetened by the hope of freedom. And we read the blessing together on the bottom of the page. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat maror. And in the English, blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to eat bitter herbs. And finally, we make one more sandwich. Now we just take our matzah along with just the bitter herbs. In the days of the Temple of Jerusalem on Passover, Rabbi Hillel would eat a sandwich made of the sacrificial lamb, matzah, and maror. Now that we no longer bring sacrifices to the temple, we eat a vegetarian sandwich. In the Jewish tradition, just as the sacrificial lamb was shared in the day of the temple, to show that we are all in this together, we are all one family. We are all part of a larger community of people, and we are all responsible for one another. We now take our wine and we join together for our third glass of wine. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. Well, hopefully you didn't drink that whole glass, because now we are at the fourth cup, the cup of hope. We have completed the telling of our ancient story. Why do we tell this story again? And now that you have said all the blessings, you may pause the recording at this moment and go ahead and eat your Passover dinner. Please come back for the next portion of our Seder, where we will conclude with the fourth cup of wine and as you go on your Afikomen search. We have completed the telling of the story. Why do we tell this story again and again for hundreds of generations? Because it is the foundation of our hope and the basis of all Jewish dreams. Over the entrance to the synagogue of the Bratzlever Hasidim are written the words, Jews must never despair. After Holocaust and pogrom, Inquisition, and expulsion, what gives us this kind of strength? Only one thing, this story. Because we saw the sea split, because we were freed from slavery, we can dream. We know that God has purpose in human history. We know that power is not history's last word. We know there is always hope. Therefore, we raise this cup of hope with all of our dreams for ourselves and for those we love, and for the world. And we recite, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Amen. And now, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the recorded portion of the Passover Seder. Please feel free to linger around your Passover table. Hopefully, you are finding creative ways to connect with your loved ones and your families, but hopefully, you are staying very safe on this special holiday. Again, we say next year in Jerusalem, but more importantly, next year in the company of those we love. I wish you all a happy and healthy Passover and enjoy the holiday.